This is episode 539 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. I am very pleased to be joined this week by Craig Springer. He is a parent of alumni of Estancia Valley Classical Academy and has a current student there, and also EVCA chemistry and physics teacher Tracy Erickson. Welcome to the show, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we're going to talk today about some recent developments at Estancia Valley Classical Academy. And I'll give you both a chance to describe why EVCA is special. But in short, from the Rio Grande Foundation's perspective, it is a high performing New Mexico charter school that has for years been under the banner of Hillsdale, which is uh, a teaching model when it comes to classical education for charter schools across the country. And it's really been a shining light for approaching education in what I would loosely call a more conservative oriented direction. And Craig, feel free to start out by
Sure.
talking about your own personal experiences
Sure.
with the school and why it's a special place to you.
Sure, I can do that. Well, let's just rewind the clock back about a decade or so. Well, even farther. My wife and I homeschooled. Actually, my wife was the homeschooler. She did the heavy lifting. We have three children, and my wife was homeschooling the kids until EVCA opened. Well, a couple years after it opened, we enrolled our son, who started high school there, and our daughter, our middle daughter, started in eighth grade. And my youngest stayed at home for a couple more years with my wife in homeschool. But I had been familiar with Hillsdale College for years, long before Hillsdale planted a school in Edgewood, Moriarty originally, but now in Edgewood.
Mm-hmm.
And I recall distinctly when I saw in the newspaper that Hillsdale College was planting a charter school literally within walking distance of my home. I thought, that's got to be a typo. It can't be, not that Hillsdale.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it turns out it was that Hillsdale. And so we eventually enrolled all three of our kids there. Two have graduated and did very well. It's been a great education. EVCA has wonderful teachers, a wonderful executive director, a principal. She's called the executive director there. She's excellent. Great folks, great teachers, great history teachers, literature teachers, physics, the sciences. It's been wonderful. And there's no frothy fad. It's classical education. It's deep dives in Socratic discussions, trying to discover the truth, learn what we don't know, learn what we do know, what we can learn more about. And I just have nothing but high praises for EVCA.
Excellent. Well, that's certainly good to hear. And uh, Tracy, when it comes to your perspective, I introduced you as a teacher at the school, but you're also a parent of kids involved in some form of educational attainment. Why don't you talk about both aspects of that and maybe why EVCA is such a special institution in our state?
All right. Well, I've been a teacher at EVCA for this is my fourth year. Um, my family, in terms of our history, we were a homeschooling family. I homeschooled my kids for about 11 years before we moved to New Mexico. And when we came to New Mexico, we were incredibly excited to find Estancia Valley Classical Academy. We discovered that they were affiliated with Hillsdale, and that was exciting for us because we had, as homeschoolers, we had been familiar with Hillsdale and some of the curricular offerings that they have. And so we actually enrolled our three oldest kids in EVCA when we first moved here. And the second year that my kids were attending, I enrolled my fourth child, who was a kindergartner, and accepted a position as a teacher as well. So we were excited to be involved. In fact, we had no idea that in the United States there was an educational opportunity that we could access through public dollars, where our kids would be exposed to just kind of the educational preservation, I guess, of constitutional principles, which is really kind of a driving force at Hillsdale, and what we do at EVCA.
And where did you come from?
We came from Washington State.
Okay. And so Estancia Valley Classical Academy, we all love it. It's like I said, Hillsdale is in the business of working with charter schools across the country. There's another charter school under the Hillsdale banner out in Gallup. There's one that's in the process up in Rio Rancho. So this is a model that has performed very well and serves a fair number of students in New Mexico, and also works across the country. I'll ask this of you, Tracy, because you're in the school every day. What would you see differently if you walked into EVCA versus a traditional school in New Mexico or anywhere else?
Okay, well, one of the things that sets it apart, at least from my experience in Washington State, I haven't been in many schools in New Mexico other than EVCA, but one of the things that you'll notice is that our students are in uniform. And our school colors are red and blue with white accents. And so you'll see kids in their red polos and their blue pants and looking pretty sharp. And I think that sets them apart from other schools that may not have strict dress codes or even dress codes at all. So I think that outward, just the appearance of the students alone just kind of sets the tone for a degree of respect that you may not see at other schools. When I walk in the door, I have students who hold the door for me. They stop and they hold the door and they let people go through. Our kids are just, they tend to be very respectful of adults. The conversations that we have at EVCA may set us apart from other schools. The things that we talk about, the depth that our kids will be able to talk about their literature and history, scientific principles. You may not find that at other schools in New Mexico.
We'll just go with probably wouldn't, but may not, probably wouldn't, or won't.
Diplomatic.
Okay, so that's great, and that's a starting point, uniforms and kind of the respect. But I've got a suspicion that when it gets into the classroom, it's also a little different. Maybe not as much as stark of a difference in the classroom where you teach chemistry and physics. Hopefully, I mean, they maybe are more challenged in EVCA than they are in a traditional public school, but they're teaching different subject matter. And Craig, if you want to weigh in here, because you had children that graduated and one that's still there. Let's talk about the subjects that I like the best, which are history and economics and literature and reading and those kinds of things. I suspect there's pretty stark differences between EVCA and a traditional public school.
So I can tell you, she mentioned conversations that they have in the classroom, conversations we have at the dinner table with kids as, junior high and high school. We had really, I would say, intelligent adult conversations about topics from all sorts of topics, going back to antiquity, to current events, and how what's happening today might relate to things that occurred, 2,500 years ago. So that speaks to their study of Western civilization. Civics is very important at EVCA. Two teachers in particular have done an excellent job in educating the children in history, civics, American history, New Mexico history. I think they're teaching New Mexico history right now. And it's just been wonderful. I've only been in the classroom one time, and I have an affinity for history, and I visited a 5th grade classroom and talked about the Civil War in New Mexico. And those kids were so eager to hear what I had to share. I'm no expert, but I know a little bit about it. I've read about it, and
But they're teaching the ancient Greeks. They're
Oh
teaching
yeah,
source material from Plato and Aristotle and those
yes,
kinds of people. That's what I'm trying to get to is
yeah,
those core things that you just don't a pride and a desire to learn about Western civilization, whereas nowadays Western civilization, to the extent it's taught, is often denigrated and seen as a bad thing by
Mhm.
many in the traditional education system, including the state of New Mexico on down, which sets all these standards. So, uh, you know, Tracy, do you want to weigh in on that difference?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, one of the important, I guess you could say, tenets of classical education is the preservation of civil liberty. And we need to understand the roots of where really our liberty is based in the United States, and that is in Western tradition. And we don't we celebrate that, I guess is what I should say. We that is the starting point for the education is the Western tradition. Um, as Craig said, going back to the Greeks, but then fast forward to our founding fathers and trying to instill in these kids the understanding that moral virtue has to reign in order for us to preserve our liberty. We need to be under law and we need to understand the order of things within our country to be able to continue to progress as a country.
Okay, so I think we fairly well established that Estancia Valley Classical Academy is unique public charter school in the state of New Mexico, and the Hillsdale model, which it was one of the very first, I believe, is the second Hillsdale modeled charter school in the entire country.
that's correct.
It's a high performing school, but all is not necessarily well at EVCA. In fact, they recently became unaffiliated with Hillsdale. And whoever wants to take that one, talk a little bit about why that happened and what that means.
Yeah, sure. So there's two categories of schools under the Hillsdale model. One is a curriculum school, meaning you can use their curriculum, and the other one is a member school. And the school in the Hojo Academy in Gallup is a member school. EVCA
Mm-hmm.
was a member school until I think it was June 1st, and it has now since become, as of June 1st, it became a
So
curriculum school.
essentially, this school year.
Yes, this school year, going
Mm-hmm.
back to June 1st. So we lost our Hillsdale accreditation, and with that, we lost a great deal of resources available to teachers, ultimately trickled down to the students, even resources available to our governing board. Actually, we call it a governing council, a GC for short. There's even resources available for the GC to manage maintaining a charter school in the state of New Mexico or any state where they occur. So the member schools in the Hillsdale in the fold, they have certain requirements to meet, certain expectations. They're called best practices, recommended best practices for managing the school, and those are practices even relating to governance.
Mm-hmm.
And when I heard that that EVCA lost its accreditation, I learned about it in mid-July, and I made some queries to the GC and learned that it had happened like 6 weeks before, and there was no apparent desire to tell the parents. And in fact, 110 days have passed since EVCA lost its Hillsdale accreditation, and parents still do not know why.
Mm.
The governing council still has not communicated to the parents why we are no longer a Hillsdale accredited school. It's been 110 days.
Okay. Well, would somebody who was familiar with the school and its practices, say last year, would they notice anything in particular different about the lack of accreditation from Hillsdale College, or would they basically see the same exact thing happening and talk about if not, or if so, the importance of the affiliation with Hillsdale, aside from just the name Hillsdale?
Well, it is more than just a name. I mean, the name carries some gravitas,
Sure,
carries some weight. It's
absolutely.
very meaningful, very meaningful. But I have here a list that was provided to me from the folks at Hillsdale because I wasn't getting any answers from the governing council. I reached out to 4 individuals at Hillsdale and asked questions and got some answers. One of the things they told me, they shared with me a document of what a side-by-side comparison of what a curriculum school gets and what a Hillsdale affiliated member school gets, what we
Okay.
used to get. And we used to have marketing and branding and public relations resources available through Hillsdale. Invitations to job fairs, classical school job fairs, board training or governing council training and support, training for the executive director or principal. Training for the school's executive director
Mm-hmm.
or a principal, as they're called elsewhere. Teacher training and support, and that's a big one I've learned. I've talked to a fair number of faculty since this bad news came down, and that's what folks are missing the most is there's no training available now. They had the opportunity as a member school to go to Hillsdale, meet with professors, meet with other teachers, network, get trained in classical education, or Hillsdale would send people out here to New Mexico and offer the same thing. So it was a two-way street. Well, that's not available anymore. Then there were also like focus groups at Hillsdale, newsletters, leaderboards, other online resources, and all those things are not available to the school any longer because the GC has failed to abide the rules put forward by Hillsdale.
So you're saying there's differences in training and differences in professional development and other opportunities that, aside from the marketing and kind of being able to say you're affiliated with Hillsdale, that will have long-term impacts, as you note.
That's what I think. You won't see perhaps the impacts now in September because it just happened in June, but
Sure.
it'll come. One of the teachers told me that it's approximately 25% of the staff are trained in classical education. The other 75% are not. So even if we have a Hillsdale curriculum, who's going to teach it if you don't know how to teach in the classical model? Who's going to do it?
Tracy, any thoughts? Being a teacher at the school currently, and I applaud you for coming on and talking about this because I'm sure you might ruffle some feathers and cause some consternation there. But what are your takeaway from no longer being directly affiliated with Hillsdale?
Well, I think we may see the impact as we continue to roll down the road. One of the things I'm troubled about is that as EVCA has grown, we have taken on new staff, and for instance, new administrator, new to our school this year. And while I applaud their enthusiasm and their willingness to learn about the classical model, unfortunately, they will not be able to go to Hillsdale and get that training in person. So that I guess that's going to have to happen in-house, and we'll have to have faith in that process, which is unfortunate. There are online resources that teachers can no longer access, which again, I think we'll see the impacts as time goes on.
Are you seeing any differences with the demeanor of the students there? Are people even aware of it at like the student level, or is it kind of so far just like the coyote in the old movies where he's off the cliff but hasn't started to fall yet, even though gravity will eventually kick in there?
Yeah. No, the students, I think the students aren't necessarily aware unless it's been an issue that has been raised within their own families by parents who are aware of it. And I think, we've got staff who are continuing to be committed to teaching classically. And so they're continuing to do what they've been doing. I think it's just kind of as we roll on towards the future, just limited access to some of the curricular materials that we had in the past. There are certain, I guess you could call them like drop boxes where you can access curriculum. We won't have access to that. We still do have access to Hillsdale's curriculum, but in terms of day-to-day lesson plans, those things, unless it's specific curriculum that they've published and made access, given access to the public, there's things that we won't be able to access anymore.
So where do we go from here? Obviously, not just folks whose kids attend the school, not just people who are at the school today, but future generations of New Mexicans in the East Mountains of Albuquerque and out in that area are going to have this educational option. Are they going to, are people going to push the leadership of the school to move back to affiliation with Hillsdale? Is that partially why you're here talking to me? Where do you and folks involved with the school want to go with this?
Well, I have an answer.
Perfect. Yeah.
And it was provided to me by Hillsdale. And actually it's encoded, if you will, in the best practices of Hillsdale College affiliated K-12 schools, charter schools. And it's the governing council's failing as to why we're no longer a membership school. And this information was provided to me by not the governing council, but by the folks at Hillsdale. And they specifically pointed out to me that it's with respect to governance, the board governs the school rather than manages it. And there is a long history, particularly with a couple of individuals, of having tentacles that reach well beyond governance, that reaches into the day-to-day management of the school.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say that I'm on the board of a charter school myself. It's actually a virtual charter school that operates statewide. So I've been well versed over the years because the state does quite a substantial amount of training for people on the governing councils of charter schools. And it's very clear that the people on the governing council should not be involved in the day-to-day operations of the school. That is for the principals and other school leaders, as they call them now. There's always new terms coming out, but the general idea is that the governing council is in charge of managing the school itself and the finances and behind the scenes, and that the school leader, the principal, is the one who's really supposed to be day-to-day managing the school. You're saying that this has kind of changed in particular at EVCA, and they need to get back to not the principles of classical education so much, but the principles of charter school operations in New Mexico.
Proper governance.
Right.
Not meddling, not day-to-day overseeing the operations of the school, but governing the school, not managing the school. That's why they hired Jennifer Rivera, our executive director, our principal.
Right.
That's her charge. So the other things that
you would think that a group of people who are so enthusiastic about the Constitution and limited government, knowing the role of the president, the legislature, and the courts, they would have a firm grasp on this. I'm being slightly facetious here in my.
But you're
critique.
on. You may be facetious, but you're on point, because I want to point out that the governing council's description of itself, the very first sentence says they are. I'm paraphrasing. I actually printed it out and I forgot to bring it so I could read it. But it says, and I'm paraphrasing, it says that we are dedicated to the founding principles of the American government, and we take that education in that vein very seriously. Yet, they are an oligarchy. They're unelected. There's no recourse to remove them. And if you want to get on the governing council, well, you have to be part of a clique, I guess. There's no election. There's no democratic process. There are 3, maybe 4, I'm not sure about one individual, but there are 3 founders that have been on the governing council for 13 years. 13 years. No, maybe take that back, 10 years, but still with emphasis to 10 years. So let me read on very briefly here about what Hillsdale provided me. The board members, in our case, they're called the governing council or the GC. The board members are expected to be independent and come from a range of professions and show a range of talents and so on and so forth. And they do, but they're not independent, because in order to get on the governing council, you have to be selected by the founding members, the three members that have been on there for a decade or more. Hillsdale expects the governing council to create a succession plan, and that its board or governing council founding members should transition off the board. And not to belabor the point, but they've been on there for a decade, and they refuse to abide that rule.
Now, just to jump in, and I'm not going to play devil's advocate, but I'll say that in my experience in being on the charter school board that I am on, there's not a lot of people banging down the door to serve in these kinds of positions. They're very much for the good of the cause, whatever that cause may be. Now, we've never had a situation where there's been a deep philosophical rift between people on the board or folks like that in terms of something that needed or did not need to be done at the school. You mentioned 3. How many are on the board?
There are presently 6. One was recently vacated.
Okay. I mean, it would seem that those are the people that need to be convinced to change what's going on at the school. I don't know. I'm not familiar because I've never had an election or seen an election at a charter school board, but it would seem that there has to be a way to get fresh blood and fresh ideas onto that kind of outfit.
I know of 2 individuals who are very responsible, upstanding citizens that are willing to serve.
Okay.
So I know they're out there.
Maybe other folks who are concerned about the future of the school will reach out to you, and I can provide your contact information should people be interested in that. Because as I keep repeating and saying, and we've all made it very clear, this is not just another charter school. If this was just a charter school in the state of New Mexico, we wouldn't be having this conversation. This is news to our listeners, because this is in many ways the crown jewel of schools in the state of New Mexico, at least for anybody who is concerned about traditional values and education in the classroom. A lot of the private schools, my kids go to a Catholic school. We live on the west side, which made it very time prohibitive for us to go all the way, kind of far out into the East Mountains to take our kids to school. But we seriously looked at the entire situation, and so we value Estancia Valley Classical Academy. So continue.
I know you do, Paul, and I remember your presentation at the Great Traditions Barbecue.
One of your fundraisers,
yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah, I remember that well, and I'm glad you invited us on your program. Another thing that was revealed to me after I have vocalized my concern about what's going on is there are a number of teachers, number of faculty, and well, I can't say staff, but certainly a number of faculty that are fearful for their livelihood. And I brought that to the attention of folks in a public meeting. And there are people that are so concerned, teachers that are so concerned about the management of the school, the overreach of the GC, that they're afraid to speak up. There's one individual in particular that's been intrusive, gone off in a rage. So I've never experienced it myself, but I've heard the story from multiple people that they've experienced this overreach in a most disconcerting way that would make it difficult for me to perform my duties. And it's very concerning, very concerning.
Tracy, anything to add to some of these topics? I don't want to get you in any trouble because you are a current employee of the school, but on the other hand, I don't want to gloss over your experiences as a current teacher there and a homeschool parent.
As far as overreach or maybe involvement in day-to-day sorts of activities within the school, I am aware of things that have happened in the past, yes. I don't necessarily want to talk about anything that, specific, but yes, I'm definitely aware of situations where that has happened. But one of the things I want to mention is The governing council itself and the fact that it's not elected by the community, by the EVCA community, has troubled our family from the time that we affiliated ourselves with the school when we enrolled our three oldest kids, two of whom have since graduated from the school. But more than that, we had kind of talked with our concerns with a couple of other families, parents of EVCA kids, and they kind of shared our concerns about, how is this upholding our nation's founding principles to have this unelected board governing our school. I didn't realize, though, how many members of the community felt the same way until they made the move to change our affiliation with Hillsdale. And then they kind of came out of the woodwork. And this conversation was happening now outside of our homes and at school and at the governing council meetings. So it is something that we are all concerned about, and we have been for a number of years.
Now, it strikes me as frustrating and unfair that I don't get the impression there's a lot of direct levers to be pulled here in terms of the governing council. It seems that it's very difficult to take people out or to change the amount of people on the governing council. I mean, we're getting pretty this is the most detail we've gone into on charter school governance in 500 and some odd episodes of Tipping Point, New Mexico. So I'll give you a chance to, go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, there's one of Mrs. Erickson's colleagues gave a public comment, and she summed it up in a sentence. All we have are words at this podium. That's it. That's the only recourse we have as a parent, as a member of the faculty. That's all we have, words at this podium. And, they can ignore us and not do anything. There is no recourse with respect to getting a change in the governing council. But the governing council needs to understand that, I'm just one voice. Mrs. Erickson is just one voice. There are a lot of people that have heard about what's going on. There are a lot of people that care. Hundreds.
Right. And, we could give a full course on direct democracy, indirect democracy, Republican rule, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
Those are all great conversations to have about the American Republic. But it seems like just a bit of an oopsie, perhaps, maybe I'm wrong, with the folks who began this school, that there should have been some ability to change people out on the governing council, even if they weren't necessarily, or maybe term limits. I mean, there's a whole conversation to be had there.
Well, that's a requirement of Hillsdale College, is the board, or governing council in our case, must establish term limits and cycle out. The founders must leave and must create a succession plan. That's what Hillsdale is expecting. And EVCA governing council refuses, and we've lost our accreditation.
Okay, so that was a Hillsdale rule. It's I know firsthand how difficult it can be to convince people to serve in these roles, but on the other hand, you don't necessarily want people to calcify in those roles either. And that's a tricky balancing act, both in state statute as well as for the school itself. But we're kind of approaching the end of our conversation here, and I hope that I've asked some penetrating questions to highlight some of the issues going on at EVCA and bring those to light. But if either of you have specific issues or more details that you want to share right now, love to have any additional information. Not at this time. Okay. Well, are you interested in either of you being contacted by people who, because this is I believe the school is chartered by the state of New Mexico.
It is.
That means it's under the auspices, if you will, not just of Hillsdale Academy, of course, but the Public Education Commission, and that's a board. Is that something that you have reached out to? And I know it's a double-edged sword, but the PEC, is that a body that would have a role to play here?
The public education?
Yeah, in terms of changing the governance or
No.
addressing some of these issues?
I think the farther we distance from them, the better.
Understood.
Yeah, and I was a bit reluctant to do this program because I don't want to cause any harm to the school. I know Mrs. Erickson doesn't either.
Okay.
There's a teacher told me just this morning that teachers are afraid to come forward to the executive director with examples of GC overreach because they don't want the school to fail. A fair number of teachers have kids in the school, and they don't want to send their kids anywhere else. They don't want the school to fail, and neither do I. And that's not why I'm doing this. That's not why Mrs. Erickson is here either. We want EVCA to succeed, and the way to do that is with the help of Hillsdale.
Well, that makes three of us. Anything, Tracy, you want to add to that, or and Craig, if you have either of you have information or contact info that you want to allow people to reach out to you on, please feel free.
The thing I would like to just kind of leave is that there are good things happening at EVCA. And so in spite of our frustrations about some aspects of the governance, we have great administrators who are committed to our school's mission to preserve our nation's founding principles. We have faculty and staff who are likewise committed. EVCA continues to attract people who want to be a part of that, whether that be faculty, staff, or families who want to enroll their kids at our school. There are generally waiting lists, especially for children in the younger grades. Our families are committed, our staff and faculty are committed, and we want to continue to move forward in a positive way. And we just want and I guess I speak for myself and not for everybody else, but I would like to see us more closely aligned with what we would expect if we were really demonstrating our faith in our nation's founding principles.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Last call and contact info if anybody wants.
Sure.
Okay, go ahead, Craig.
I can be emailed at craig@lobo.net, CRAIG @lobo.net.
Well, that's an easy one to remember.
Hope so.
All right. Well, thank you for your time today, Craig and Tracy. I too care tremendously about this school. Care about charter schools in general in the state of New Mexico, and truly the distance between the west side and the traffic of Albuquerque and the Estancia Valley Classical Academy is the prime reason that my kids were not sent there to begin with. But it's a valuable institution, and hopefully we get things resolved and get back, hopefully, in the Hillsdale fold if all things work out. So thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to this show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.